For a long time, and even more so since President Donald Trump's return to the White House last year, Europe has endured Trump's complaints that it's a complacent continent hiding under America's security guarantee. For instance, last year, Trump effectively forced the hands of his NATO allies to raise defense spending to 5% of GDP by 2035 after criticizing member states for essentially not pulling their weight. Trump even sent shockwaves throughout Europe when he suggested that the US may forfeit Article 5 and refuse to defend a country being attacked if it was not reaching its spending targets. NATO spending aside, Trump also started a trade war with the EU, threatened Greenland with annexation, has slashed US support for Ukraine, and moved to push Kyiv towards an as yet uncertain peace deal. Yet as he now pursues the first open-ended military campaign of his presidency, he's found himself needing Europe's support, namely its military bases as well as its defense supplies and expertise. So in this video, we're going to take a look at why, despite Trump's constant Europe bashing, his war in Iran proves that America really does need Europe. First, and most obviously, the US needs access to military bases in Europe in order to reach targets in the Middle East in the first place. For context, tens of thousands of US troops have been stationed across Europe since the Cold War on around 50 bases, the bulk of which are concentrated in the center of Europe, primarily Germany, Italy, and Poland, and the US has used European bases in past Middle East offenses. After the September 11th attacks, European bases and logistics networks were essential for transporting troops, aircraft, and supplies to wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Facilities such as the Ramstein Air Base in Germany and the Naval Air Station Sigonella in Italy became key hubs for airlift, refueling, and intelligence operations during these conflicts. A few years later, in 2012, amidst violence following the toppling of Gaddafi in Libya, the US consulate in Benghazi came under attack and 4 Americans were murdered, including the US ambassador. In response, and as the situation in Libya worsened, a Marine response strike team was permanently based in Spain, which hosts a US base that was used heavily during the Gulf War, enabling the US military to quickly react to any future attacks in the Middle East. More recently, preceding Israel's 12-day war in Iran last year, the US again relied on bases in Europe to stage aircraft refueling and to move fighter and transport planes towards the Middle East. At the start of the US's current war with Iran, the US immediately requested permission for its military to use European bases to carry out strategic operations and strikes in Iran. However, due to the question of legality regarding the US attack, not all European leaders have been so quick to allow the US to use bases in their countries. The Italian government said that any potential request from Washington would need to be carefully assessed. France authorized a temporary presence of American aircraft at certain bases, but reportedly secured guarantees that the planes wouldn't be used to carry out strikes on Iran. Meanwhile, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, who's repeatedly butted heads with Trump, namely after refusing to accept the US president's call for European NATO members to increase their defense spending, outright denied the US permission to use its military bases in Rotter and Moran to attack Iran, calling the US's actions an unjustified and dangerous military intervention, which prompted the US to withdraw 15 military aircraft from the base. Trump slammed Sanchez's government as terrible and unfriendly over its decision to buy US military planes from using Spanish air bases to attack Iran before threatening to cut all trade with Spain, the EU's 4th biggest economy. Trump also launched quite a personal attack on British Prime Minister Kama, who did not allow US forces to use US bases in British territory, including Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean for offensive strikes on Iran because of doubts over their legality. Trump complained that the UK's denial of permission meant that US planes had to fly many extra hours and belittled Starmer further, saying that he is not Winston Churchill, while the UK has since changed its position, allowing the US to use its bases for, quote, defensive strikes and announcing that one of its 2 flagship aircraft carriers has been placed on high readiness. Trump responded with a jab at the UK and Star, posting on Truth Social that the carrier was no longer needed and that we don't need people that join wars after we've already won. Nevertheless, over the weekend and on Monday, B-52 bombers landed at the UK's military base in Gloucestershire. It's not just European bases that the US needs, though it may also need European military resources. In a closed-door briefing this week, senior military officials told lawmakers that the U.S. military might struggle to intercept every drone and ballistic missile attack unleashed by Iran across the Gulf, and acknowledged lawmakers' concerns about the burning through of said interceptors. Even Trump, who claimed that the U.S. had a virtually unlimited supply of medium and upper medium grade munitions, said at the highest level we have a good supply, but we are not where we want to be. During last year's conflict with Iran, reports suggested that the US had used roughly 25% of its THAAD interceptor stockpile, and the heavy usage forced the US to temporarily freeze the transfer of some munitions to Ukraine in the weeks that followed. As such, the US is looking to its allies to help supply them with interceptors, most notably, and surprisingly enough, Ukraine. Early on, after the Russian invasion, Ukraine sometimes used expensive missiles or even more expensive Patriot interceptors, which cost around $13.5 million to knock down Russian drones and missiles. However, this proved economically unsustainable, so Ukraine adapted using heavy machine guns, less expensive rockets fired by F-16s, electronic jammers, and new interceptor drones built by Ukraine. Ukraine can now destroy most of Russia's drones, and the US now wants a piece of Kyiv's newfound expertise. According to Zelensky, who Trump once called a dictator with no cards to play, the US and other Gulf countries are reportedly exploring deals to purchase Ukrainian-made interceptors capable of destroying Iranian drones. Most recent reports say that Ukraine has sent interceptor drones and a team of drone experts to protect US military bases in Jordan. Although Zelensky has made clear that Ukraine's support is contingent on the fact that it doesn't weaken Ukraine's own defenses and that Ukraine should get more diplomatic clout and support from the US for its ongoing peace negotiations with the Kremlin, while Trump's entry into the war in Iran has drawn many comparisons with Iraq in 2003, one key difference is that then President George W. Bush attempted to build a public case for the invasion and managed to pull together a coalition of the willing that included many European countries. The same cannot be said for Trump's war with Iran, and if anything, the lack of outright European support highlights how much the US needs Europe.